Happy to start recording and excellent. Okay, over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Ruth. Good morning. Welcome everybody to this meeting of the NHS Highland Board. Very pleased to see so many people here, and particularly a warm welcome to members of the public and the press who are joining us virtually today. So just so that everybody's aware, you'll probably see at the top of your screen, this meeting is being recorded so that we can upload it in the future to our web. Just like to remind everybody as well that we don't use the chat function in this particular meeting. So if you would like to ask a question or make a contribution, if you could use your hands up button at the top of your screen. It's lovely to see cameras on if your broadband will support it. Obviously, if it's a bit patchy, you can switch it off to see if that makes things better. And if everybody could just stay on mute unless you're actually contributing, and that just helps to reduce any background noise. So before we move on to the agenda, just want to say a couple of words about a few people. So firstly, obviously, we said goodbye to Jean Boardman, one of our non-execs. She finished up just at the end of last month. And we've probably done it before, but just to officially record our thanks to Jean for 4 years of lots of hard work on loads of different committees, particularly active in Argyll and Bute. And we wish her all the best for her future ventures. And Argyll and Bute is a small place, so I'm sure those of us here will bump into her at some point. I would also like to extend our congratulations to Pam Cremin. So Pam has been appointed to the role of Chief Officer for the Highland Health and Social Care Partnership. Pam has been in the role on an interim basis since February this year, and she's got previous experience as the Integrated Service Manager for Mental Health and Drugs in NHS Grampian as well. So we're really delighted that Pam has been appointed to this substantive post. And also just an official welcome to Gareth Adkins. I know, Gareth, you've kind of been with us before, but obviously you started a little bit earlier this month. So this is your first official board meeting, so welcome. And just kind of picking up those 2 points, it's really great to know that we've now got all members of our executive group appointed to substantive roles, and that puts us in a really good position. And it's great to see that we've got that strong, capable leadership team firmly in place. So really pleased to note that. Okay, so I'll move us on to our agenda now. So first of all, Ruth, do we have any apologies, please?
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, we do. We got a couple of apologies this morning, one from Alistair Christie and another one from Gaynor Roger. And Pam Cremin has just messaged to say that she'll be a little bit late. So, she will be late, but she will be arriving soon. Okay, thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Ruth. Okay, does anybody have any declarations of interest that they need to make? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up, so that's no declarations needed. Great, so that moves us on to 1.3 on your agenda. These are the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 30th of May and the associated action plan as well. So they are before us today to approve the minutes and to note the action plan. So first of all, I'll just give everybody a second in case anybody has any accuracy issues they need to raise regarding the minutes. Seeing any hands up. So just before I move on to the action plan, then, is everybody content that we're approving those minutes as an accurate record of the meeting? Great, I've got thumbs up there. Super. And next we have the action plan. So this was in the Teams channel as an Excel document, and I'm just getting that open in front of me. So you'll see on the action plan there, we've got a number of these that are proposed for closure. I'll just pause for a second though. Does anybody want to say anything in particular regarding any of those actions, or has anybody got any questions about those? No, okay. So just to confirm, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 proposed for closure in front of us on that action plan. Is everybody happy that we can go ahead and close those? Yep. Fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. And before we go on to the rest of the agenda, I'll just check, does anybody have any matters arising that they wish to raise from the previous minutes, or that we don't have on the agenda? No. Okay, great. Right, that's that bit out of the way. I'll move us on now to item number 2. So I would like to invite our Chief Executive, Pam Dudek, to give us her report, a verbal update of emerging issues.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Sarah. So a couple of things I want to cover this morning. I suppose just to confirm that we continue to be under significant pressure across our services, and I guess that's not unusual through the summer for different reasons, perhaps to the winter. But the services do remain really busy and really stretched. And that is right across the system, whether that be out in the community in general practice or within the hospital. So it's in every part. And those are not new challenges for us. We've been talking about that, as you know, for some time as we try to find a way to recover and balance things. So I suppose the kind of key message, and we'll see it, I guess, as we go through the papers today, is that as an exec team, we have got quite a lot to balance within what is quite a complex and challenging system. And we have been spending quite a lot of time really challenging ourselves in what we can do differently to try and move into a better position generally, and to think really long and hard about what the method is and what the shape is that will take us in the right direction. So I think we've been making some really good ground there with the level of debate and challenge that we've been putting to each other. And we are just trying to draw together that kind of recipe for success. And I'll say that in a cautious way, because this is not a straightforward world at all. But we are keen to try and understand I guess the best that we can do with the resources we've got in the context of the policy, which hasn't changed, within the context of our strategy Together We Care in Argyll and Bute, the Transforming Together strategy. How do we keep on that path, keep that long-term I guess North Star in sight, and work with the balance of the here and now, whilst not losing the importance of the change that we have to try and facilitate to get to a better place. And I suppose the other part to that was good, we last week had our Ask Me Anything open session, and there was about 30 people attended that, and that session was very much about keeping our strategy live, about engaging and encouraging feedback and from our communities as well as from our staff, and that was a really good, a reasonable attendance for one of those sessions. But we need to do so much more in that space to work with our communities to understand the shift and change that needs to happen, and equally to help our staff who are flying the plane as we try to redesign it, which is never an easy task, and support them through what has to be a reasonably significant change agenda if to be successful. So that's what we're toying with. That's what we're spending a lot of time on, and trying to really draw together all the key components and not look at things in isolation, because everything is interrelated. So whether that be the most important aspect is about how we care for the people that we're here to serve, and the quality and compassion that sits around that care, the finance and performance, and then the culture and governance. So we are looking at it holistically and looking at how we as an exec team fulfill our exec function, as opposed to our individual portfolios. So really important work, really important leadership challenge, and the space that we're in. So I hope that gives kind of some assurance of the level of effort and thought that is going into where we're at and how we take this forward. I suppose just on the back of that, then at the next board you will get a report on culture and leadership, and what that next phase we propose, what that will look like. We'll have gone through a lot of diligence, and I already have had a lot of discussions about what needs to be in place to really reach the front line and make sure that we reliably have a really positive working environment for people, but more importantly, when they're challenged and under pressure, that we support them to be able to stay in that reasonable place and not to find themselves in a difficult place as a team. So we're putting a lot of effort into that as well, and that will come in due course. So that's the kind of challenging and a difficult space, but I thought it was also good to balance that with some of the kind of positive aspects. So Scottish Health Awards are out at the moment for nominations. There's 16 categories, and as of last week across our system there was 13 nominations, and the nominations close on I think it's the 13th of August at 5 p.m. So we are actively encouraging teams and individuals to think about who should be nominated in that space, and it's a great event and it's a great recognition, and we will continue to do so. What we have also been discussing is that internally, was particularly in the north, how we look at staff recognition as a routine aspect of what we do within the organisation, and I know Gareth has picked that up already. Obviously Argyll and Bute are already way ahead and have had restarted their staff recognition, and I think that's great, and we need to learn from that. Couple of really important ones though. In the King's Honours, we had Cathy Shaw got an MBE, and we had Dr. Miles Mack had an OBE in our patch. So real tribute and to the work that they've done and the positive leadership that they portray. And we had Amy Noble as the Nurse of the Year. She's in Raigmore and Respiratory Clinical Nurse Specialist. For her inspirational leadership, got Nurse of the Year for RCN Scotland, the Royal College of Nursing Scotland Award, which is just absolutely fantastic. And, you know, huge congratulations to her for achieving that. And we are have a team in the finalists for the RCN Team of the Year, which will be pulled together, will be decided later this year, and that's under the leadership of Brian Corr, who's our clinical nurse specialist, and it's the Highland Urology Nursing Team, and it actually is about their change and innovation and their diversification of workforce to be able to deliver the services that we need to that patient group. So I always think it's really good to just stop and think about what's going on, because we can be very bogged down on all the challenges and difficulties that we have, but there are some fantastic teams across our patch. There are teams that aren't getting recognised like that who will equally be doing fantastic work, and we need to tap into that, build on it and learn from it. So it's some really good stuff. That's all I've got for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. That's really good, and what you're right, some incredible challenges, but what a lovely note to finish on. And absolutely, you know, big congratulations out to all those people that have been nominated or awarded. But like you said as well, there'll be so much good stuff that's happening out there that isn't necessarily, you know, being kind of formally put into something, but we know it's happening, so that's really good to hear that. I'll just pause. Does anybody want to ask any questions from Pam or add any comments with regards to the things that she's spoken about today? Okay, I've got Graham, please.
Good morning. Pam, a question about your opening remarks. One of the questions I'm probably asked most frequently when people know that I'm a member of the Health Board is what's changed from pre-COVID to now to make the pressures on the health service what they seem to be now? And is there anything peculiar to our area that make these pressures more or less significant? Thanks.
Thanks, Graham. Gosh, I could probably take quite a while to answer that question. It's kind of multifactorial. So when we've looked at, and we continue to look at how we were pre-COVID, how we are now, there's probably a number of differences to take cognizance of. I suppose that one of the most stark ones is that we do work differently. Some of the ways that we went about our business, some of the initiatives that were supported nationally, that's changed. So we're not really no longer comparing apples with apples. So there is difference in how we work, and things have shifted on. But by far, I guess what's become more kind of difficult is that recruitment and aspect. So and retention, because people have made different choices based on their experience through COVID, what they want out of life, and perhaps have decided to retire earlier than they might have. But recruitment wise, we definitely, that workforce supply is a critical. It was difficult before COVID, but I would say that what we're seeing now is kind of unprecedented. And then the impact that that's having on, for instance, the business models associated with social care and the sustainability of those business models, we definitely, from a north and rural perspective, have seen that amplified in comparison to other areas, because of course if it goes down in one area in a rural spot, there's not just another provider down the road. So I think those are the biggest differences, the remote and rural, the kind of supply of workforce to more so out in localities, and that social care workforce, and nursing and general practice is another area that has seen quite a significant shift, with people making different choices. And we've seen both in Argyll and Bute and in Highland a greater number of what we call 2C practices, which are the salaried practices. So there are some quite significant trends and differences that are not the direction we'd want them to go in, and actually are part of the challenge that we need to resolve. But it is demand different. Demand doesn't look dreadfully different in terms of numbers. The feedback from our staff is that the level of how sick people are is also has increased, and so therefore that might account for some of our longer length stay. But again, these are the things we're really trying to drill into and be clear that we do understand what it is we're trying to resolve. So quite a lot of difference.
Thanks, Pam.
Thank you, Pam. And I've got Anne next, please.
Morning, everybody. So Pam, I was interested in what you were saying about the work that the executive team has been doing recently, and that you feel that you're soon going to be having a reset of how you feel the organisation can move forward. Just following on from Graham's question, one of the things that I often hear out and about in the organisation is a request for a greater direction from the board as to how to redesign, or how to transform, or how to address our financial challenges. I wondered what your thoughts would be about that question that is often put to me.
Yeah, I think it's a reasonable ask. I think it's fair enough. It's about the translation of what we think we're doing into something meaningful to our frontline staff to be able to work to, and then to support them in how they do that, because it is very difficult when you're stuck in that here and now space to be able to see the wood for the trees. So I guess when we look at the ADP today, and you look at the level of activity that's going on in there, one of the questions that I often ask, and most people, I think, working in the exec team will sit around, so what, and what will it take to deliver on those actions? And at the moment, one of the things that we think is really important to do is to be able to translate these into much clearer kind of service plans and change programs at a local level, that they become meaningful for the team. So there's something about breaking down that high level action planning is something that people can clearly follow. So I'm not saying that doesn't exist to some degree, but I think we definitely can do much better in that space. And I think that's the general position of the exec team, and where we're very focused.
Thanks, Pam. I'll just check. Anne, did you want to come back on any of that? Okay, okay, perfect. Okay. Thank you, Pam. I'm not seeing any other hands up or any questions. That's certainly given us a good feel for where we are at the moment and the scale of the challenge ahead. But I suppose also to your last point there about the ambition, which is really good to hear. And I know that colleagues around the table will we'll be seeing how that develops. And I think you're right, we'll come on and talk about it under the ADP in a little bit more detail about how as a board we can support that by tracking the progress as well. Okay, super, thank you, Pam. I will move us on now to item number 3. So these are our finance papers, and just for members' kind of ease, it was a little bit jumpy around in the pack. So if you use your bookmarks in your combined papers, it starts at page 285 of your combined pack. And I would like to invite Hillis to speak to these papers, please.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. So we are reporting the Q1 position in the finance. So it's the first time we reported to board the 23-24 position. As previously reported to the board, the finance plan for 22-23 was a pre-savings deficit of 98.2 million, and this reduced into 68.7 million with the delivery of our savings plan of 29.5 million. That forecast has now reduced, you'll see, to 55.8 million. This is due to the receipt of additional allocations that we've had from Scottish Government, and is also still predicated on us delivering our full savings plan for the year. We move on to our current position. Our overspend at month 3 is a budgetary overspend of 20.7 million. However, this does include some anticipated overspend. So obviously we're going to have a share of our 100 million gap. So even after our savings delivery, we are expecting a deficit. So we are always going to be reporting an element of overspend. Within the partnership, Highland Health and Social Care Partnership on table 3, you can see the detail of that breakdown by area. But the main overspending areas in line with the patterns that we were seeing last financial year, with high spends on locums, prescribing costs that are continuing to increase above the planned level, even though we've put inflation within there for this year. There are 2 out of area patients, and the 2C practices continue to be financial pressures for us. Within the acute services, table 4 provides the detail by service area. And again, the pattern is continuing, so we're not seeing anything particularly different, with the main pressures being within delayed discharges and additional beds, increase in drugs costs again, and again, locum and agency spend, which were all within our anticipated plan for the year. Within the support services figure, that does hold the central pressure. So the expected pressure, so part of that financial gap that we're expecting, so inflation and elements like that we haven't passed out to the services. So that's why that figure looks particularly high. For future reports, I think we'll probably split that out from the rest of corporate services so we can see that clearly. And Argyll and Bute, the detail is within table 6, and Argyll and Bute have got a year-to-date overspend of just under 650,000 and a forecasting just under 1 million. The IGB had planned to utilise some of their reserves to offset their budgetary gap, and that's their position after their savings. We move on to financial sustainability. So as we've reported previously, we are under a period of support by Scottish Government. We've just tried to pictorially represent in figure 1 our approach to delivering our long-term sustainability. So how we move through the this year's challenge and some of the efficiencies and the areas where we can try to bring our costs down. So we are focusing quite heavily on our supplementary staffing, our prescribing costs, which is an area that I've already said there's pressures, and our scheduled care areas around a variation. Moving into the different horizons, so looking at wider service redesign and change, and by the point of Horizon 3, we're looking at the long-term sustainability of full value-based healthcare and how do we deliver our services different for our future population needs. As I said, Scottish Government are working with us, and by the end of June, we'd planned to have the analysis undertaken by Scottish Government, so we've provided a lot of information around our financial position. They've taken all that information and various other data streams available to them and provided us with their view of our financial analysis and some areas for opportunity. And we're working together with Scottish Government to develop our particularly in-year plan initially. And by the end of September, we should have an agreed action plan for delivery of our, firstly, financial position for 23-24, where they're expecting to deliver our 29.5 million as a minimum, and then the longer term plan of reducing our gap over time to become financially sustainable. Within figure 2, I have just included a really high level scenario as to our potential position. So the best case position for us is that we continue our current operational spend rate as it stands now, and that forecast forward, so no additional cost pressures, and we deliver our savings plan, and that brings us just slightly under our current forecast position. Our worst case is that our operational spend increases, and we continue to see those increases in drugs and additional supplementary staffing costs and other things that we don't yet know about, and that our savings delivery is minimal. It won't be at zero because we already have things in place and things are already delivering. And then the likely position is based on, again, our current run rate to continue as it is and as managing any future pressures and delivering around 60% of our savings. At this point in the financial year, it's a bit too early to set out our confidence levels around those. As a part of working with Scottish Government, we're still pulling together the detail of our savings plan. So there are some schemes already in place and they're being worked on, but there are others that we're just having to try and work through the detail of that. So once we have all of that down on paper, we'll be able to make a much better assessment of our confidence of delivery. There's some information there just on supplementary staffing to give a bit of a view as to how our costs have increased. So they have increased dramatically from this point last financial year. However, that is built into our projected financial position for the year. That's one of our cost drivers. And we've just set out some of the financial risks. So as I've already said, one of the biggest risks to our financial position will be delivering our savings targets. So that needs to be one of our areas of focus. But there are some other risks. Most of them have already been mentioned around drugs cost, inflation increases, and further increases to our supplementary staffing as our workforce is quite fragile. Moving on to our capital position, our anticipated capital is still being agreed with Scottish Government, and we try to assess the likelihood of the timescales of some of our specific schemes. But as with our revenue, capital is limited, and we won't be expecting any additionality to our capital above that we've already, the plans and capital programmes that we already have in place. So as a result of that, our assurance we're given to the finance paper this month is limited, and that's predominantly due to the fragility of the savings plan at this point. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Helette, and thank you for explaining that assurance level. I think that makes sense and it's a sensible approach. But let's have some questions and comments from members on the finance papers. Alex, please.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for the paper, Helette. The forecast savings, table 7. At first glance, it's a concern because, well, half of them haven't started. Basically, is the numbers that are there. Is that because of the reliance? Isn't the right word? Is that because the Scottish Government's improvement action, whatever you want to call it, the work that they've been doing with us, is that yet? Are we waiting to implement that? And then are we expecting, let's say in month 5, that some of those zeros will have shot up considerably, or is this going to be a hockey stick? Are we going to be looking at a low level till about month 9 and 10, and then all of a sudden it takes off? How do you think it's going to go in that situation?
Thanks, Alex. Firstly, no, we're not waiting for Scottish Government. We have been looking at our areas of savings for a long time. You know, this is something that's quite iterative. It's something we're trying to progress. I guess the difference is how we've captured it on this sheet. So at the moment, we're still pulling together that detail. So there's work going on in the services. Our delay is probably capturing that in a central point. So that's the bit that's happening at the moment, is actually getting it in one place so we know what's going on where, so that we can then better evidence it. The year to date does show the actual savings made within the financial position. And yes, we will expect that to increase. So as actions that have already been taken now to bring in agency spend, the impact of those probably won't start kicking in for a few months. So there is a bit of balance of both. We do expect the zeros to not be zeros by the next board meeting. There will be some areas that we've just not pulled them out yet, or some of these actually are quite big figures that are one-offs. So when action will happen, it will trigger that saving, and we will bank the majority of it. So not all of them are kind of phased throughout the year. So there is a balance there. We still know that we have got a fair bit more work to do on our savings. As I said, the confidence in delivering the full 29.5 isn't quite there yet. So once we've got all those plans in, we'll have a better idea of what that gap is. But no, we're certainly not waiting for Scottish Government. Scottish Government are helping us to focus on the areas, whereas maybe at the moment we're trying to do a little bit of everything. This is trying to focus our minds on the biggest places that we can deliver most value. However, if that doesn't deliver the full programme, we'll have to look at some of the other smaller bits as well.
Thanks, Hillis. Just following on from that, I've got a question, quite a broad question, I suppose, about our approach. So, you know, great that we've got that support and that that external view to help us focus, like you just said. So I'm interested to know what the process will be. So once we get that kind of finalised report and or package from Scottish Government, sort of what it is that we do with that. And then leading on from that, I'd quite like if you could maybe say a little bit something about just our approach in terms of how we're going to be tackling this with our teams and our staff, because obviously, you know, you and your team tell us what's happening with the money, but you guys are not responsible for saving it, and it's going to be a real team effort. And so I just wondered if you could say a little bit something about how we're going to communicate that out and support the people in our organisation to work with us on this, I guess.
Yeah, sure, and I will bring David in. So a lot of the work that's happening is within the strategy and transformation team, because we're trying to align our strategic direction with our savings. The two shouldn't sit separately. So from a immediate actions point of view, and some of the stuff that has come out of Scottish Government is around our spend controls. So we just need to get a little bit tighter around some of our messaging on non-pay spend, for example. So they're not things that are going to make a big financial difference. They're not going to make a huge dent in our gap, but they will start to give a different message, I suppose, on what we have available to us, and making sure that we're limiting waste wherever we can from a non-pay perspective, which brings some of those controls in place while we're working through the longer term, because, you know, the majority of our spend is on pay. There's no denying that. However, we need to make sure that our non-pay elements are absolutely as tight and efficient as we can be, to make sure that we're not then putting too much pressure on pay. And when we talk in pay, I am majority in most points talking about supplementary staffing. So it's making sure that we're making the most of what we have now. From a process point of view, we've got a whole infrastructure in place, and there's a small army of people that are pulling all that together. I'll bring David in because I'm sure that he can probably better articulate that work than I can.
Thanks. I think it's important to recognise that the work in this space has been going on for some time, so we're not starting. It might look, as you look at the number in terms of how it's reported with zeros in it, as we're waiting to start. I can understand why that might be an interpretation, but actually the conversations with each of the respective groups from the corporate services areas into the main operational areas has been ongoing for some time. As we know, our financial pressures are also linked to our resourcing pressures from a headcount point of view, which points us towards the transformation that needs to take place. And indeed, those are the conversations that are taking place within the respective operational areas. When we tried to engage to do that, the question was asked earlier about what direction is coming from the board with regard to change. The reality is it has to happen at all levels within the organisation, because the transformation can't just come from a top-down basis, but also needs to involve those who are directly delivering services. So that has been ongoing. In many ways, the challenge for us is the administration around all of that activity to be able to capture what that transformation will actually deliver. We have got the infrastructure that is mobilising to be able to make that more robust, and we also anticipate and have already started engagement with our wider staff groups in terms of what that means. So Heleth and I have already met with some of the SLTs, and that will continue to do so, and we'll work with the chief officers in terms of both the support at a specialty level and a geographical level in terms of how best we can do that. We have committed that that will be something that is going to be transparent. We've committed to the Finance Resources and Performance Committee that we will be able to share where that savings plan is in the next meeting, as well as what that governance process will be, and that will be available for review. Thanks.
Thanks, David. That's really helpful. Pam, did you want to come in on this particular point? Yeah, okay.
Just to add to that, so clearly the people aspect of this is significant. It's significant for our staff. It's significant for the people who use our services in terms of how do we do this change? How do we have those conversations? What do we learn from what we've done to date? And we really need to build quite strongly on that. The Safer Staffing Bill is an important one. The principles around that are really solid and what we should be working to. I think we've, like most areas, been a little bit guilty of we will apply our tools and our safer staffing measure against today's models, as opposed to the challenge within those principles is actually as much about redesign as it is about just recreating what you've got. And so I think, again, that's part of the refresh. So how can we use that much more proactively around a change agenda, where we keep trying to fill posts that we can't, and we, I guess, take the learning from the kind of Amy Nobles of this world and the Brian Corrs in neurology, and what workforce diversification can we bring and to life that allow us to change our models but still retain our quality and deliver our services effectively. So that, for me, that's really important. And certainly as an exec team and with Gareth coming in, a revisit of, so what do people need? It's a tricky space to operate in. How do we equip and support people to have the right disciplines and capability to do this well? And I think that goes back to Anne's question. So how do we give that direction, but how do we support them to understand how to work differently in what is quite a challenging space? And how do we strategically deploy the core resources we've got around transformation, change, OD? How can we be much more deliberate and where they need to go, which again has to come back to, so what is our ADP translating to, and where do we need to target that? So it's getting quite a high level of direction and rigour, with hopefully still an endpoint that has an empowered and capable system, not a micromanaged, left to kind of wilt at the end of it. This is absolutely about how what's the next version of this organisation that really understands how to learn how to do this well. And we're not alone in that. I mean, I speak to my colleagues that it is a huge challenge for our staff to get their heads, and for the people who use our services, because they can't imagine sometimes that they could be different. And our goal is still to deliver care as close to home as possible, which is easy to say, but not always as easy to deliver. So I hope that's helpful.
So that's helpful. Thank you, Pam. I've got a few other people who wanted to come in with some questions, so I'll bring them in. I've got Graham first, please.
I'm asking a question about the Scottish Government intervention, and it follows on maybe a wee bit from what Pam's saying, about models and so on, about how we do things. Helen, I assume that there's some kind of benchmarking takes place within the scrutiny that comes in from the Scottish Government that looks at our costs and makes some comparisons to elsewhere, but presumably that isn't just purely a cost comparison. It also looks at how our costs are made up. So is one of the ways that we learn new models really quite closely linked to the financial scrutiny that we're under at the moment. So I know you're working probably with accountants in Scottish Government, but they're presumably having to talk with their clinical colleagues about how our costs are broken down, and that then leads to some discussion about the models we use, and so my question then, both to Pam and yourself, is: are we learning about maybe better models that might be more cost efficient as well as better for patients within this financial process? Sorry, that sounds a bit convoluted, but at least I know what I'm trying to ask.
Not at all, Graham. I completely understand what you're asking. Yes, we've had various bits of information from Scottish Government. So they haven't necessarily focused on benchmarking our finances. So they've not looked at, oh, how much do you spend on this and how does that compare against others? What they've done more is take other data. So they've taken our headcount statistics and they've given us the movements over the years. They've given us how that might compare based to our NRAC share compared to the whole of the Scottish area. We've had various packs on discovery data, which is around benchmarking activity performance. So it'll have things like length of stay in different areas, theatre utilisation, those kind of areas. So we've had quite a bit around that. We've had a specific pack around our admin spend. So again, how our administrative workforce has increased and how that compares to others. So we've had various bits of information. I would say that has focused more on the short term rather than the longer term models of care. However, there is the sustainability and value piece of work that's going on across Scottish Government, which is linking into the different groups and looking at different areas. So again, I would say that the focus at the moment is quite heavily on this year and the delivering efficiencies, but we're trying to get to the longer term, but that's obviously tougher. It is harder, but there is national programmes of work happening that's trying to build at some of those. And yes, that is across all of Scottish Government. The support that we're getting at the moment is quite strongly finance driven, but that's because they've been doing quite an intensive piece of work on our data. So as we then start looking at what are our options for change and delivery, hopefully they'll start to bring in wider kind of representation across Scottish Government colleagues. I'm sure others will want to come in and support that answer.
I was going to say, yeah, thank you, Hillis. I saw that Gareth's hand went up and Pam's hand went up. I don't know, Gareth, was it in relation to this? Yeah, I'll bring Gareth in and then Pam might be able to kind of close that off. Thanks.
I suppose the comments I'd make probably follow on from what Helen said there. I think there was a range of information that was helpful to pose questions for us about where we need to look further in terms of then drilling into, say, for example, the workforce data, understanding where our headcount's gone up in relation to just so for how we use it locally to understand how to drill into that further. And one of the examples around that is asking for more information about where has that headcount increased as a result of some of the expansion of our services, so we can get the narrative right for our staff, because there has been investment in the organisation, so the National Treatment Centre, for example. So it's just getting a bit more. I think it's been helpful to pose questions for us to then pose ourselves, if you like, and go further into it. The other points that I think Helen touched on, and I'm sure Pam will as well, is the link across all of these elements in terms of integrated service planning. If we're looking at what the service needs to deliver within what we currently have, an efficiency, that, and getting within control there in terms of what we should be delivering, that will then look at some of our supplementary staffing and workforce elements, and then there's also about recruiting to the vacancies we have to be able to shift that. So then from that flows our finances. So there's a bit about actually starting at one end and working away all the way through, and that rigor, and that's just from the current service models to some extent. And then obviously we've started to talk about what would look differently in terms of different service models. And then the one thing I did want to say is that we can look at elsewhere, and I started conversations already, is what are the different workforce models that people are using elsewhere that we can start to accelerate in terms of, and Pam referenced them, so medical associate practitioners, they're being used in other places. How can we accelerate progress against that? How can we look at different advanced healthcare support workers, those sorts of roles? So some of these things are happening, but it's how can we get them happening at pace across the organisation? How for people to think about themselves within their services, how they use those models. It's not about us telling the specifics, but pointing them in the right direction for these models that are available for them to think about.
Thanks, Gareth. That's actually really helpful to understand that. Pam, please.
Yeah, just to kind of reiterate that, I mean, the data coming through from Discovery is really helpful, but we must use it for signposting, not judgment, because you can't just look at it and jump to an assumption that that's the reason that looks like that. And actually, just as has been described, we need to drill into that and understand it in our context, and what the maybe the interventions might need to be, or the changes that might need to be to improve that. Also at Chief Execs nationally, we are looking at pretty much the same data set. Every board has got its analysis from the Public Health Discovery platform across these domains that we've been given. So whilst we got it in advance because of the support, it was only about a week in advance and everybody's got theirs. And what that does is challenge. So why is Board A managing that performance against that? So say virtual, how come that board's managing to do a third of their activity virtually and that board's not doing any? And so it's the questions that it poses us, and then therefore, so what can we learn from each other, or is there a good reason why we're sat where we're sat that would make it difficult for us to do that? I think so that's been really good discussions as well within Chief Execs around taking a deep dive into looking at that. There are certain kind of spec models that in certain areas that we're expected to adhere to as a minimum standard. Sometimes those are very much placed in a way that actually for remote and rural might not necessarily be an easy fit. But again, our response to that has to be, so if we were to incorporate that intervention, because it's a reasonable and good intervention to be able to do, for instance, hospital at home might be a well and good intervention to have in the suite of activity that we can deliver. But we probably wouldn't do that with a unique team with our geography. So what do our teams need to be able to do? What training do they therefore need? How do they have to diversify to be able to deliver and keep people closer to home? And is it possible? Is that possible to achieve is as much a question as anything. So I think our starting point has definitely got to be about more questions and discovery and exploration to be able to reset what these extended models can bring. And we know historically, I've been around unscheduled care like many people in here for the last 30 odd years. It's not one thing. You don't shift it with one thing. It's a complex area. It's usually a suite of different things that will bring about a change in unscheduled care and how people behave, as much in how you work with your communities. So I think there's a lot in this for us, but it's really useful to see that comparison and to stimulate further questions. And I think if you take that to our frontline teams, that's something much more tangible for them to deal with and to comment on and to consider what that means in terms of their specialty. The only downside is, again, it's very acute focused, so it doesn't really represent the whole system, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to look at things more holistically and get dashboards that allow us to see the system as opposed to just those kind of hard measures that really relate mainly to our hospitals. So but absolutely useful and stimulating and helpful in signposting us to where we need to ask more questions and understand and learn, as opposed to the caution being all these data sets must not be used just for a glance and judgment, because that doesn't tell the story.
Thanks, Pam. Okay, I've got a couple of other questions lined up, and I just apologise. There's somebody who's being very enthusiastic with an angle grinder right outside my office, so I am very sorry if that noise is coming through. I'll take Muriel next, and then followed by Jerry.
Thank you, Chair. Pam has covered my question, so I'm going to have to reframe it a wee bit. This all sort of started with the discussion of savings, and there is something that puts fear and anxiety in staff. So I think we need to consider the staff at whatever level they are, whether they're parking attendants or whatever, at what ideas they can come up with. We need to capture that data and take them with us. And the word I've written here is we need to tweak the recipe of what we're doing, because the ingredients have changed, because we don't have the numbers, we don't have the finances. But I'm really keen that everybody that provides our services in Highland, whether it's acute or in our communities, that they are part of the solution. They are the solution, and we get that message across, because unfortunately in current times we're using or we're exposed to social media and we're strap headlines, X amount of savings need to be made, and that makes people anxious because they look at themselves. So they are the solution. They will come up with some ideas for the refresh and support the changing of direction, and NHS Highland can do that. They have proven a track record in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Muriel. I think you make a really good point. I'm not sure that Pam, we probably don't need you to come back on that as such, because I think Muriel kind of articulated that beautifully, actually, and I'm sure we would all agree with that, exactly that sentiment about engaging with the staff. I think absolutely that's going to be critical. I'll take Jerry, and then I've got Garrett as well with a hand up. So Jerry next, please.
Thank you, Sarah. It's really more of an observation, but perhaps with a question at the tail end of it. We've spoken a lot about the savings and the transformation challenge facing us this morning. I was actually just wanted to take a couple of minutes to think about the second part of the financial equation is actually to deliver a balanced operational budget, and Helen's paper helpfully is identifying quite a few operational pressures which are coming through, whether that be inflation, whether that be prescribing, whether that be the new Craig's situation. So I just wondered, probably too early in the year to say that, but what level of confidence have we got that we're going to be able to manage all these risks as they emerge during the year, and not, so because it's a significant burden to add on top of the delivery of the transformation journey which we've got to go on, any one of which taken either in isolation would be challenging enough in any year. Thank you.
Helen, did you want to come in?
Do you want me to come in on that,
yeah,
Sarah?
Thank you.
Yeah, that's yeah, I'd love to have that acute hindsight that I could prejudge what's going to happen in the future. I guess from our current position, our current run rate, we're managing that. We're already seeing increased inflation. We're already seeing some of those costs. I'm sure that Alan Wilson would come in and say where he's seen them across his areas already. But we are managing to hold onto those at the moment, but in effect it just increases our savings burden, doesn't it? Because it means having to manage or offset our costs, and this is where we're going to have to try to be really careful in how we evidence that and how we report on that, to make sure that we can split out the operational additional pressures from our delivery of savings. What we don't want is for them all to get caught up, so that Scottish Government don't think that we've delivered on anything. If we can deliver on our savings and been really clear on how we've brought down our projected spend in specific areas, and then we can evidence where other cost pressures have possibly taken us off target, then that would be a much stronger message. You know, at the end of the day, they're still expecting us to deliver the bottom line figure that they're expecting us to deliver. But if we can split it out, at least it gives us a much stronger place to be able to evidence why some of those things went off. But to not be able to manage those pressures and not to deliver efficiencies, savings, reductions in costs, whatever we want to call them, would not be a good place for us to be. So we need to be mindful of them, and we'll capture them. But there's also, you know, there are other mitigations that happen in year, not just risks. We're very good at articulating the risks. We're not so good at articulating the mitigations. And we do have things in our back pocket always that we use to mitigate. There are always some allocations that come out in year that there's slippage against. We do have some turnover in staffing, which can provide some benefits. There can be some technical adjustments that can provide a benefit. So there are can do things as well, not just the could happen things, risk. So it's just about making sure that we're managing and mitigating those, as well as delivering on our plans on how do we reduce our current spend rate.
Thanks, Hillis. And then I've got Dara, I think, with our last question, and then we'll probably be ready to wrap this one up. So I'll invite Garrett in, please.
Hello there. Yeah, I mean, obviously we all know that if we all reuse a paperclip and what have you, we can make savings across the board. But do we, and obviously if we can get fully personnel and cut down on the agency, we can save the money. But do we talk between boards as to be best policies and how they're saving money? And at the end of the day, when we get to a point that if we can justify that, well, this is why we're having to spend this money, does Scottish Government then step in and say, well, that's as good as you can do if you can't get staff and you know the other stuff? And the other thing is on the capital, if we got an idea of, well, if we spend this money, we can save all this money, like with AI and stuff, is there funds available to actually help with capital, things like that?
Hillis, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I will come in. So yes, as the answer to the first bit, we do talk. Sustainability and Value Programme has got representation from all the boards. Below that there's the Finance Improvement Group, and they meet, and that's absolutely the purpose of their remit, is to look at improvements and share best practice. We get information shared out all the time around one board delivered this, it's delivered some savings. If you just implement it, you could effectively deliver Y amount. So we're sharing that kind of information constantly. They're now putting that on the Discovery platform as well, so it's easily accessible to everyone. But I think the message around, you know, a Scottish Government going to accept that we've got to as good as we're going to get, I don't think so. No, I don't think that they can do that, because they've got their own financial position that we have to manage. But the reality is, at the moment, that all boards are facing financial difficulty. So it's not a one or two odd board that's slightly different. Everyone is, but it's just the level of it. We're at the higher end. We're right at the higher end, which is why we're getting that additional support, along with two others. And we've started meeting now regularly as well. So we're sharing our experience and opportunities, and where are we taking that to make sure that we're getting that learning from each other as well. So yes, there's a lot of work happening across the system, and how we share ideas and how we do things differently and how we work with each other. We've been talking to, I go to the North of Scotland Directors of Finance meeting, and we're looking at, well, how can we do things across our own teams once rather than doing them 4 or 5 times. So we're really moving into that space of actually sharing resources as well as just sharing ideas. So yes, that work is ongoing, it's continual. The bit around capital, from the Scottish Government capital point, no, there isn't any money there. I guess what there is different innovation funds in different areas, so possibly outside of the Scottish Government health budget. So it's how we make sure that we maximise those opportunities. But we, at the moment, the capital programme for Scottish Government health budget is committed, it's fully committed, and some. So we'd have to look at other areas.
Thanks, Heleth. Anne, you wanted to come in?
Sorry to hold you up moving on, Sarah, but I just wanted to say something. So I've heard lots of encouraging things during the discussion. I think, for example, the work that Gareth was talking about in terms of being able to give our teams ideas from elsewhere about what we might mean when we talk about a different model of workforce. So, you know, about integrating the work throughout the organisation. So that's all very positive. I think that what I would like us to really think hard about going forward is the issue about how staff are receiving these messages and how we're engaging staff in this work. We've made huge progress on our culture agenda, much of that based on an extensive programme of staff engagement around that topic, and putting in, you know, various supports around that engagement. And I think what's in my mind is, do we need to have a similar level of investment in staff engagement around this issue? I think that I've heard some of the messages, I think that probably Heleth and David have been putting around our senior leadership teams, and absolutely we have to support the idea that every person in the organisation needs to think about best value and needs to think about every penny in the organisation. But I'm also conscious, again, just from various interactions in the organisation, how difficult these messages can be for some of our staff who are on a daily basis having to make really difficult decisions about prioritising the resources that they have at their disposal, whether they're clinical or social resources. And I think that's a very difficult place for staff to be. And it's obviously related to Pam's comments earlier on about the difficulties of flying the plane while redesigning it. But I think we can't underestimate how this comes across for staff at the really sharp end of our financial and workforce challenges. So I think that would be my ask of our team going forward, is to, you know, if they could really think about how we might review how we're engaging, especially our frontline teams, around this really important challenges that the board face. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. And I can see that Pam's hand shot up. I know, Gareth, you wanted to come in as well, but I don't know which order you want to take it in. Pam, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I'm fine to come in. Just to agree with what Anne said, that is very much the topic of discussion. So how do you make it easy for the staff to engage, but equally, how do you ensure that you're taking a holistic approach to this? Because the bottom line is that we have to find a way to have those conversations holistically, not just from a financial perspective, because actually the one thing about the discovery data, if you take that as an example, it's about practice, it's about good practice, about best practice, and what does that mean for us? And actually, I think that we've been spending a lot of time thinking about, so what is the package that you go out with at all the different levels, and how do you do that? So that is absolutely the space that we're in, and will continue to be in for some time, I suspect. The other side of that is when we come forward with where we want to go with the culture and leadership programme next phase. A large element of that considers, you know, the compassionate leadership that we're looking for across our organisation reliably, because it's already there in abundance, but it's not there reliably all of the time. But the technical capability, that capability that I talked about, that doesn't mean people aren't capable. This is, just as we've said, really tricky stuff, really difficult space. But as you know, many of us in the exec team have been frontline clinicians and didn't like work talking about money. So we do understand what it's like to be in that space, but it's incumbent that we try and have a formula and an approach, and a consistent approach and methodology that makes that a safer space for people to feel that they're in. And just to go back to Muriel's point, to be very thoughtful about the level of anxiety that can cause in the system. So yeah, we have a lot to balance here, but that has been a hot topic in terms of our discussion.
Thank you, Pam. And I can see that Gareth and Louise want to come in with some comments on that as well. So I'll bring Gareth in next.
Yeah, again, building on Pam's points, the initial thoughts have come in terms of looking at the leadership and culture programme are around how we enable that capability and skills to be enhanced, strengthened if it's needed to be strengthened at different levels within the organisation. So we as an executive team can set direction, and we can, as we've just talked about, the board setting direction collectively, but we need everybody within the leadership space at all levels in the organisation to be able to communicate that. And staff engagement starts at that front line in terms of the managers that are working with the front line directly. So the real trick for us is to align all of that through the organisation with the skills and capability to have those difficult conversations within teams. Because again, referring back to what we talked about earlier, is those are those teams that are best placed to make decisions. So there's a little bit about us making sure we've got the process in place for good staff engagement, but then everybody stepping into their responsibilities to do that staff engagement well. And some people will do it naturally well because they have the skills already and they have experience, and some will struggle. And that's the bit that we need to think about. Where do we support those people that are maybe not necessarily struggling, is probably not the right word, but think about might want some further support, and that might just be some further hands-on, or it might be that skills development. And something we talked about yesterday was leaving a lasting legacy. So it's not just about going in and helping people direct support, it's about actually helping them through something so that when they get to the end of that process, they have those skills and they can continue to work. So there's, as Pam says, there's a lot of work to do to support our staff and develop our staff, but the leaders in that space are the key for me, I think.
Thank you, Gareth. Louise, please.
Yeah, just to agree with everything already said by Pam and Gareth, it is very much about getting everybody on the same page here, but it's also about listening too, because we know that when we go out and give messages, people want to be heard as well. So it's how we square that circle of what are people saying to us, that their pressures and their challenges, but also their ideas, how we can do things differently as well. So it's how we capture all of that in the conversation. So it's about leadership, but it's also about that everybody being on board really, and consistency of messaging as well, because people will say, well, those folk over there were told that their services are developing and ours is being cut, and all those type of conversations. So it's about how we get a consistent and fair message, and people and also understanding our direction so that we're very clear of what we're saying to people, rather than going out with a bit of a less coherent message.
Thank you, Louise. All really good points. I think that's been a really thorough discussion. We've talked about the grip and the robustness of the process. We've talked about the culture elements and the size of the challenge ahead. So I think that was a really good, well-rounded discussion. Obviously, there's a lot more scrutiny around our finances ahead, both in this board and in our FRP committee as well. So just to recap, we were being asked to note the content of the report, and as Heleth touched on at the beginning, we're currently proposing a limited level of assurance just to reflect where we are in terms of building that plan, and we should see that level of assurance increase as that develops, taking into account that support that we're getting from Scottish Government as well. Is everybody happy with that proposed level of assurance? Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. So I'm going to move us on now to item number 4. So this is our Argyll and Bute Alcohol and Drugs Partnership Annual Report, which is in your pack there at page 11. And I'm going to invite Tim to speak to this, please.
Thank you very much. I'll just do a brief introduction. I think it's very important to have the alcohol and drug partnership plans and reports coming to the board. For a long time, we've had the Highland Council Area Report, the Highland Alcohol and Drugs Partnership Report coming, but it's also important to have Argyll and Bute. It has a different governance process to it with the Integration Joint Board, and so it's in a sense gone its own way in the past, but a year ago we had a report, and this is coming back to the board for assurance. The current chair of the ADP, it's confusing with two ADPs, both the Annual Delivery Plan and the Alcohol and Drugs Partnership. The current chair of the Argyll and Bute Alcohol Drugs Partnership is Fiona Davis. So she will be best placed to answer some questions, no doubt, that board members will have. And we also have attending the board this morning Laura Stevenson, who will be able to answer very specific questions. I think it's important before considering any specific issues to note some of the great challenges that we've got right across NHS Highland with alcohol and drugs. Probably the most important and notable one is around drug-related deaths, which are far higher in Scotland than other parts of the UK, and Scotland has some of the highest drug-related death rates in the whole of Europe. So that's one of perhaps the most important area for the Alcohol and Drugs Partnership to concentrate on. Scottish Government have addressed this and are concerned with this and one of the principal ways they're looking at that is through treatment services and the development of MAT, or medically assisted treatment standards, which are set out to ensure that drug treatment services reach the appropriate standards. And that can be, certainly in terms of access, quite a challenge for more remote and rural and island areas. There's also a particular issue with alcohol. In terms of absolute numbers, alcohol causes more serious illness than drugs do. We're seeing some good trends in terms of many of the alcohol indicators, but we've still got very major problems when it comes to alcohol-related harm. And also, although it's verging on other areas, we need to also be concerned around tobacco use, whether and nicotine use, whether smoking or vaping, and that comes within the remit of the to some extent of the Alcohol and Drugs Partnership, and work that's doing particularly around with young people, which is which is set out in the report. So as I said, this report comes to the board for assurance, outlines a range of activities within the Argyll and Bute area as a companion to previously what's come for the North Highland area to the board, and I'm happy for board members to ask any questions, although as I said earlier, it may well be that Fiona and Laura are best placed to answer them.
That's great. Thank you, Tim. Okay, do we have any questions or comments? I've got a couple, but I don't know if anybody else wants to come in. Bert, please.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, everyone. A comment and a couple of questions, if I may, please. Firstly, I thought the annual report was very well presented, and I found it a very interesting and indeed quite an easy read to follow and understand. So well done to those who have been involved in the drafting of that. My two questions, both are in relation to drugs issues. There's reference in the report to a refreshed national strategy in relation to drugs since 2022. I wonder what that has actually meant in relation to the ongoing work of the ADP. So has it meant a complete change of direction? Has it meant that there has had to be a significant pause to allow a refresh? There has been some reference to that in the report, but I would just welcome hearing a little bit more about that. And my second question is in relation to the referrals from police custody. There's reference to, in page 21 of the report, that there's a lower than expected numbers of referrals from police custody. And I'd like to understand a little bit more about that, please. Thank you.
Bert, thank you very much for your comments on that. And Fiona, if you're happy for me to answer the first, certainly Bert's comments around the refresh. So just to let you know that we, due to the national guidance, as you said, that there was a refresh that was required for our 3-year strategy. So our previous strategy was 2020 to 2023. But due to the national guidance that had come out, we had a refresh day, a face-to-face day in Inverary. We had over 40 partners attend. We had people with lived experience attend that day, and also a range of partners from third sector and public sector to come along. And what we did some group work, and we looked at our progress against our local strategy and the 4 pillars, and what we needed to continue, what we could, if there was anything that we could pause, and then what our priorities were going forward. And we have recently drafted up an action plan for this year, 2023, and presented it to the ADP committee just yesterday, actually. And so one of the actions from that to take forward the 2023 action plan is to have subgroups on each pillar. So we're still, it's not a complete rewrite, it is a refresh. We still have the 4 pillars and around prevention and early intervention, the ROSC, the recovery oriented systems of care, which is the ROSC, and custody and public health approach to those issues that you were mentioning, and also the GIRFECT, which is getting it right for everybody. So we've identified priorities within these areas that we want to take forward, and that's within the action plan. there's some groups that are already established that are taking forward that. For example, the MAT standards work's already been very well established and continue to develop that work with specific specifically looking at MAT standards 6 to 10, but also a whole families approach group as well that's been established, and also looking at the drug-related deaths, what our systems are around that, and reviewing and improving that. So I hope that gives you some insight into the work that's being actioned for this year, and happy to take any questions.
Laura, would you like me to pick up Bert's second question then about the police custody?
Yes, please.
So thank you for that question, and thank you for your comments about the report. You know, we work really hard to make sure that our reports are very easily accessible to people without a professional background or expertise. So that comment's particularly appreciated, and I'll pass that back to the wider team. I think the query about police custody is that we don't know why that's happening, but we flagged it so that we can do some further work to try and understand it more. We have excellent representation and participation from Police Scotland, both at a kind of PC level, but also at a more senior officer level within the Alcohol and Drugs Partnership, and with the subgroups that Laura's just outlined that within the strategy. I also attend our Community Justice Partnership in Argyll and Bute, and the Community Justice Partner Coordinator did a presentation just in our ADP yesterday. So the parts of the system work very closely together in Argyll and Bute. But obviously, as Police Scotland make their own changes, managing their own transformation, inevitably that impacts on the availability of officers, the way they're doing referrals. So we flagged that we've seen that change, and then we're working together to try and work through the cause of that, and to make sure that everybody that's in a custody setting that needs a response from one of our partners within the ADP, whether that's a treatment and intervention response, an advocacy response, a diversionary response from a social work perspective, because obviously within Argyll and Bute, community justice social work is also a delegated function to the HSCP, that we can make sure that everybody gets the right intervention or support that they need once that's identified within a custody setting. So I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you both for your response. There could be a number of reasons, of course, Fiona, why there are low numbers of referrals, and I think it's right and proper to have this looked at. So thank you again.
Thank you, Bert, and thanks, Fiona and Laura. I'm going to bring Susan in next, please.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I'd like to join Bert in supporting, the comments about how accessible the document is, and how easy it is to access the information in it. So thank you for that. But there was one area where I couldn't quite link the numbers and the narrative, and that was on the piece about access to residential rehab on page 30. It does say that there's a new pathway and making it easier for people to be referred and to access. But then it shows that the numbers this year compared to last year have gone down by about 20%. So I wondered what was behind that. Were fewer people needing to have this system, even though it's easier to be referred to it, or is there some other story behind why fewer people have been able to be provided with this residential rehab in the last year? Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Laura, are you okay to pick that up?
Thank you, Susan. So you're quite correct in noting that the residential rehab group has been established, and putting in forward the pathways. It is a multi-agency group, and they do assess every single client that requires care. So it is a full assessment that's done with the third sector services and other public sector services, including the addiction services, really to look at every individual case. So as far as I'm aware, it is really through that scrutiny, and I'm not aware of any other reason at this moment that would identify why those numbers have gone down.
Okay. I've got Garrett with a question, and then I also have a question. Garrett, please.
Yeah, just congratulated. There's some really good policies there, so hopefully they'll have an effect. I was just wondering, when you were talking about the hotspots for the drug-related deaths, is there a reason, and do these hotspots move around, or is it just mainly an area that has a hotspot?
I can pick that up, Laura. You know, that the areas that predominantly have drug deaths are where we have the greatest number of population, where people are able to sell and procure drugs, and that's where we work very closely with our colleagues in Police Scotland. And there's also obviously a statistical link to deprivation. So obviously year on year we have a slight variation, but the patterns in Argyll and Bute tend to be over a period of time that Dunoon and Oban experience the greatest level of drug-related deaths, and that's where we tend to focus the greatest degree of our intervention in trying to combat and eliminate that.
Thanks, Fiona. Katrina, you wanted to come in.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, a really good report, thank you. It makes absolute sense to do a test of change in Dunoon. It really did, and I could see the rationale behind it fully. When I look in particular at the MAT standards, though, I think standard 1 is a huge challenge for rural and remote areas. People present in all different settings, healthcare, social care, justice settings, and enabling them to access MAT on the same day of presentation becomes very challenging the more remote and rural you are. Now, apologies if I've missed something within the report, but I'm just wondering if there's any idea as to how you take the learnings from what you've done so far to expand that into the more rural locations that you have, because I'm sure there's learnings that we can all have throughout the whole area from this.
Thanks, Katrina. On you go, Laura.
Sorry, thank you, Katrina. I'm happy to start, and if Fiona wants to add any further comments, then I'm happy for her to do so as well. So yeah, you're absolutely right. In terms of MAT, 1 is a big standard to meet, and it is particularly challenging when it is focused on remote and rural areas, and I think that has been identified nationally. There is now a remote and rural subgroup through the support that we get nationally, looking at the particular issues around that remote and rural areas have, and the same day prescription is one of those challenges. However, it's quite good to actually look in depth at the figures. So it's not just the mechanics of getting the person to have access to the medication that they require, but it's also working with that individual. So they may not want to start medication immediately, or they may not have fully engaged in the service immediately. So there's different reasons while the numbers are that provides a kind of longer lead-in time. We have had the MAT implementation support team, the national team, support us with our MAT standards, and technology is something that we'd need to look at, likes of Near Me, and how we can use that across Argyll and Bute to facilitate that process of speedy prescriptions and access.
Thanks, Laura. I don't know, Fiona, did you want to add anything onto that?
Yeah, it obviously, as soon as we had the MAT standards shared with us, we did have that slight heart sink remote and rural moment where you think, goodness, that's going to be a challenge. And
Argyll and Bute are on monthly reporting on this basis rather than quarterly reporting, because it has been such a challenge for us to be able to meet the standards in the way they were described. But I was fortunate enough, I'm going to play it that way, to go and meet the Minister when we submitted our first return, describing some of the difficulties. We were invited in. I took it as a positive, and I was able to share some of our thoughts about the way that the standards have been constructed and whether enough thought had been given at the outset as to the likelihood of being able to work within those very strict timescales. And I think that's where the rural group, I'm not saying it was just down to my comment, but I'm sure that, and amongst others with similar perspectives, that's why the remote and rural group was established. But I think the broader point really, rather than the semantics of the standard, is about how we give really rapid access to treatment and intervention for people who need that and for whom it may be a life-saving intervention. And that's something that we've been working really hard, as we said, with the national team, so that they can recognise our work and support where the parameters are in the policy intention. And we'd be really happy to work obviously with Highland and with other remote and rural areas, as we have been doing, to ensure that we share each other's learning on the best way of achieving really what's about the outcome for the individual, and that rapid access to treatment and intervention where it may save a life.
Thank you, Fiona. We're a little bit behind schedule, but I did just want to ask a question, probably at the other end of the scale. So thinking about early intervention, messaging, prevention. And I suppose I was thinking about my local community, but it'll apply to other areas of the Highlands and Islands and Argyll and Bute as well, is kind of the role that the alcohol industry plays in our communities, not just because they're big employers, our distilleries, but it is a part of the culture in a lot of different ways. Now, clearly in the drinks industry, they have a duty to promote responsible drinking and responsible use of alcohol. But thinking about how we work in partnership with stakeholders across our communities, have we explored doing a bit more in partnership with distilleries, for example, or the drinks industry more widely, who are kind of in a lot of ways really embedded in our communities, and so maybe are kind of hold the or sort of sitting at the gateway to engaging with a lot of people. And I don't know if that's something that we've done before.
So I'm going to see if Tim wants to pick that one back up. And all the others, I think that might be for him.
I think it's only fair, Fiona, that I picked this one. It's something that we've given thought to, but across the whole of NHS Highland, but is a very challenging and difficult area, and I don't think there's a right answer to it. We do need to recognise, as anchor institutions an anchor institution ourselves, with our employment and the influence in the communities, also that around distilleries. Distilleries themselves, of course, don't employ very many people individually. There aren't a lot of people who work there. However, there's a wide effect on the economy, and particularly on places like Isla, with a very much tourism economy, which is connected, and of course moving over to Jura as well to some extent. It isn't an easy picture. There's a move now within public health generally to look at commercial determinants of health and how that's the commercial sector work with governments and work with their customers and work out with advertising and policy to try and influence the wider picture. And there is a tension between the work of health organisations and commercial organisations working in the same areas. So I think some parts of it are really easy, that we can work together to ensure that distilleries and other organisations associated with alcohol sale are safe and look after the health of neighbours, look after the health of their employees. That's quite straightforward. Working with the alcohol industry in terms of alcohol consumption, I think is a lot more difficult, especially as the with the culture that is largely alcohol based. And also we need to be aware of the large number of people who are suffering health harms because of alcohol, whether directly or indirectly. So, for example, quite a lot of high blood pressure is associated with alcohol. So it's getting that balance right. I was only looking yesterday at licensing arrangements for the Highland Council area and how we balance that up. And I would encourage board members and any other people there to have a look at that licensing and what the options are. We've produced various options for people to consider and sent them into Highland Council. So I think it's something that we need to work on. I'm afraid I wish I had a better answer to that, and I think we can look also at what's been to and fro within Scottish Government around alcohol advertising to see how complicated the area is. So I think it's something that we need to continue to look at, but we certainly need to go in with our eyes open and being aware of what the and it's mostly large multinational distillery companies when it comes to the distilleries, what their aims are, and be cautious when we're looking at opportunities for any joint working.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Right, so just to recap what was being asked of the board in relation to the Argyll and Bute Alcohol and Drug Partnership annual report. So we've been asked to note the content and the proposed level of assurance around this report is substantial. Is everybody happy with that? Yes, okay, great, seeing thumbs up and nodding, that's brilliant, thank you. Right, I'm going to move us on now to item number 5. It's Tim again. So we've got our joint health protection plan for 2023 to 2025. And just to let members know, we'll take this item and then we'll take a little comfort break. So I'll hand over to Tim. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. This is quite an extensive paper, but I hope it will also be one that we can get back reasonably to time on. Just a word about governance to start with. This is one of the not too common areas where the responsibility sits with the board, that for health protection there isn't the delegation to the integration joint board in terms of the regulations, although clearly people within Argyll and Bute do an awful lot of work around health protection. The report presents the joint health protection plan, and it's a statutory requirement that we have a joint health protection plan, and that's a plan between the health board and the 2 local authorities. The plan itself has already been both to Highland Council and to Argyll and Bute Council and has been approved by both of them. There's been a bit of a hiatus over a few years for the plan. It's meant to be a continuing plan from 3 years or so to the next 3 years. But with health protection staff both within the board and also particularly environmental health staff within the councils being very busy with COVID, the more proactive work of developing the plan has not been able to be actioned until more recently. So this is a sort of a rebirth of the plan, and the last one was before came to the board a couple of years before I joined as Director of Public Health. That said, really the areas that are covered within the plan are a continuation of what has gone before. A lot of the health protection work has been is quite reactive to the demands that and outbreaks that we get, whether respiratory illness or often gastrointestinal illness. So there are a collection of actions there, and some of them relate to diseases which are largely things of the past, but there are risks about them coming back, and particularly tuberculosis would be one of those. There are areas where I think that further work can be done to prepare for future plans. To some extent, the plan is a joint, well, is bringing together the different work. So bringing together what health protection do, what the two councils do through their environmental health departments. And there are other areas. There are areas where, for example, environmental health departments work, but that work is carried on elsewhere within public health or elsewhere within the board, for example, smoking cessation. And I think there's more that we can do in terms of bringing that work together. Also, I think that there is more that we can work. It's too early, I think, for this plan, but certainly for a future plan, to look proactively and what we do more proactively in terms of health protection. But as we get the results from both the Scottish COVID inquiry and the UK-wide COVID inquiry, I think that will help us to be able to plan better how we look for health protection in the future. I think the other area and this is no different from how it's been in the past, but I think we need to look at a more rigorous arrangements around the governance for this plan. And there is an Environmental Health Liaison Committee, which is referenced in the paper, which is a committee that works between health protection and the two environmental health departments, but that needs to be better connected to, from our point of view, what we can determine the work of the board, and that's referenced in the paper by inclusion within the annual health protection report that currently goes to the Clinical Governance Committee. And also, I think we need more attention to performance on health protection, and that will be working through, well, it works through currently to the Population Health Programme Board. So I think if we can continue that, then we'll get a better continual understanding of how health protection works, and also better be able to get a slightly more connected report in the future. So I think this very well fulfills our statutory requirements, and I think we can get substantial assurance from the report around the work that's being undertaken. But I think there is a little more that we can do to link it better with the work of the board. I'm quite happy to take any comments or any questions.
Thank you, Tim. I'll invite others to come in with questions or comments, but I'm going to ask my question because it links in with what you've just said. I agree that kind of the governance and the assurance, you've explained that very well, but I welcome your point around kind of linking it across better, because I suppose when I was reading the report, understanding the governance structures that are in place, I think what did stand out to me, though, was perhaps a slight absence of linking it to some of the other structures and work that's ongoing. So, for example, in the table, there's a table, I can't remember which page it is, the different priorities, and it talks about kind of addressing health inequalities. And I suppose I would hope that we could maybe link that to things like our mainstreaming report. I also wondered if there's a place for our community planning partnerships in this space, and to some extent as well. And it does get a bit complicated with the different partners and the way the governance works. But, you know, the work that happens within our HSCP or our both HSCPs around addressing health inequalities and where that might sit in the bigger picture relating to this. But yeah, so I think my main point, though, was about the addressing health inequalities and that question around community planning partnerships, if they do play a role here at all.
Yeah, that's thanks. I think they're well made points. From the health inequalities point of view, I think that there is a much wider picture. I mean, I think health inequalities within the plan is seen in a particular lens of health protection. And it does need to be widened out, and there are many of the communities which have the particular needs highlighted here, which have much wider needs, and it's often the most marginalised, whether people in prison or refugees, asylum seekers, or people who use substances, are the ones who are also more vulnerable to the types of conditions which are presented in the report. So I think that it's a really vital area to cover, but what's also particularly important is to link it with the wider health inequalities agenda, and to make sure that it's not just siloed within public health interventions that we consider health inequalities, but that's covered across the whole piece. I think from the community planning partnerships, yes, I think I would agree with that. Some of the areas are a little bit niche and a little bit reactive. Such as dealing with outbreaks of communicable disease, that they tend to be, if not straightforward. I mean, that there is processes to deal with them, but the wider community issues, I mean, it's not that dissimilar from dealing with alcohol and substances, and there's an overlap there. I think are very much the province of community planning partnerships, and also multi-agency working, whether with police, with fire, and particularly with the local authority, with the third sector. It's really quite an open door for getting that work in, and I think I think to some extent it gets back to the proactive and the reactive thing. I think to some extent health protection and environmental health have been delivering services in quite a reactive way and doing that very competently, but we need to look forward and to see how can we make outbreaks less likely, how can we improve the protection of our communities over the next 5 or 10 years. And I think there's a lot of scope for looking at that. And just to go back to something that in both parts of the board area around substances is Planet Youth Initiative within schools, which got mentioned in the previous paper. But I think that demonstrates how we can work to get community cohesion to tackle substances and wider issues, and that sort of approach I think can also work with health protection. So I think it's just a little bit of a change in the mindset to be a bit more proactive, and that links in with the governance to make sure that everyone knows what's going on.
Okay, thank you, Tim. I've got a couple of questions lined up. So we've got Graham followed by Bert. So I'll bring Graham first, please.
Thanks, Tim. It's not often we get a visual aid along with a question, but Gareth has very kindly presented us with a picture of the Gairloch, and tucked up there at the back is Faslane, the nuclear submarine base. And yesterday, as I was driving past, there was a long military convoy of weapons, with all the attendant facilities and supports. But I'm just wondering what kind of level of involvement the Health Board and the Council would have in that kind of movement, where obviously anything going wrong would place considerable strain on our resources.
Thanks so much. We have very close working relationships, both with Argyll and Bute, and Argyll and Bute Council have with Faslane. There are in-depth emergency plans to deal with any incidents there. I went on a tour of the base a few months ago, along with people from Argyll and Bute Council and local communities. There are detailed arrangements. I mean, people may be aware, who are familiar with the area, of the off-site centre, which is a mile or two south of the Faslane base, and connected with that we've got very whole load of detailed plans. I got an email this morning around a planning session at the end of August. There's also a planning session a couple of weeks later that I'm intending to go to. So yeah, we for all our for all the nuclear facilities, we've got very in-depth plans, and that links closely with emergency planning for Argyll and Bute Council. So I think the risks there are not are very well managed, and it is certainly, I think they're well managed. So it's not it's because of the profile of the risks. There's an awful lot of effort goes into that.
And sorry, Tim, just one follow through from that. There's also the movement of traditional weapons and such like, and this will cover other bases. I assume these areas, the traditional weapon bases, are as well covered as nuclear.
Yeah, well, I mean, we are not directly involved in the in any discussions on the movement of weapons, but where there are risks for other MOD bases, then we're involved in the discussions around that. As an example, there's a base at Poole U which has both a nuclear and a non-nuclear element to it. And I think my last visit to Poole U was to attend an emergency exercise on the non-nuclear elements of that. So yeah, in terms of time and numbers, we would tend to the big effort is on any nuclear risks, but we're involved. There's a whole element. I mean, even getting back to the previous paper, we've got risks from distilleries, and they're managed, and we have emergency exercise there. So it's graded around the level of risk and the level of profile of that, and there's a very considerable emergency planning infrastructure jointly with councils.
Thank you, Tim. I've got a question from Bert, followed by Alex.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tim. An observation and a question. I appreciate that it's a joint health protection plan, which involves a number of different agencies, and it's over a 3-year period, I think. But I note there are 27 priorities, national and local. I just wonder how realistic it is to achieve these priorities, and I guess, how do you prioritize the priorities?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think yeah, we can't give adequate priority to 27 different priorities. I think what we're doing within public health is we're producing a work plan which is prioritising our activities across the board. We will be having two I suppose core priorities, which are prevention and tackling health inequalities, and we need to see the work of things like this within that frame. So we've got how I suppose the two particular priorities we'd look at joining those two things together would be, in terms of prevention, is how we prevent the future pandemics or mitigate the impact of future pandemics. And then secondly, in terms of the health inequalities, how we protect the health of those who are most marginalised. So it's sort of looking at those priorities within that. But I think as we develop a more robust governance system around that, I think that will be become easier and clearer to do. And some of the priorities, I suppose, have been seen as priorities for a long time, and just to go from one plan to the next. And I think we can get better at making sure that we know which ones we really want to give the most priority and the most time to.
Thank you, Tim. And Alex, please.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. It's not a question as such. It's just to build on the answer that Tim gave to Graham about Faslane and expand on it. So for Dunray and Vulcan, it's exactly the same situation. We've got an emergency plan, had it for many, many years. It's practiced on a regular basis. It involves a whole series of multi-agencies, so police, fire, NHS Highland. Everybody's involved in it. But once the plan's prepared, it's tested and all the rest of it, when things are moving, that Faslane move, for example, that you mentioned, but nobody's told about the date, nobody's told about the timings of these things, because their security level is such that you can't, that the public can't know it. And that's why the emergency plan and the testing of it is so important, because nobody knows it's going to be happening, and therefore you've got to react instantly if there is a problem. And to be fair, there never has been, but that doesn't matter. It's the fact that we're prepared for it. So that was just to build the whole picture for NHS Highland, not just for Argyll and Bute.
Coming very, very quickly, just to, I would, for completeness of all our nuclear sites, to say that that I've also been doing a recent exercise in terms of Dunray. So we do them for all our sites, and just to again to emphasise, we know nothing about weapons movement.
Thank you, Tim. Jerry.
Thank you, Sarah. And I just wanted to thank Tim and his team for really such an informative paper. But what I was really struck with when I was reading it, and I started off with the COVID learning, because although we're waiting, as Tim has said in his introduction, we're waiting probably some time for the results that will come out of the national and the Scottish COVID inquiry. We know preparedness will be one of the issues which is raised there. And what I was thinking about as well, and I wasn't aware of this, I saw Highland has got the largest incidence of private water supplies in Scotland, probably the UK, therefore, and I've got some experience of that on Orkney. So it was really then, it's how do we, and maybe this is a common theme from this morning, it's how do we move that health protection limited resource we've got more into that preventative, proactive space that you've spoken about, Tim, when we're probably already stretched just responding to what we do already on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think it is probably that it is the two things are making sure that we're efficient and also making sure that we can prioritise properly. And I think the efficiency works across agencies. We need to make sure that we're not duplicating work, whether it's on Scottish Water or the local authority or Scottish Environmental Protection Agency. That we do what we're good at, and we do what we are. The legislation says we need to do, and we don't duplicate what other people do. And I don't think there's a lot of duplication going on, but I think there's there is always scope for being more efficient, but also we that we prioritise and make sure that we don't regard the proactive stuff as something down at the end of the line. I think one thing I've been talking to people in the rest of public health, including health protection, about is just simple things like what I've discovered is apparently called the Eisenhower grid of what's urgent and what's important, and what's not urgent, not important, and the 2x2 grid. And I think sometimes we concentrate on the urgent stuff, and even the urgent non-important stuff, rather than on the non-urgent important things. Apparently Eisenhower used it he was the first person to use it really to prioritise what he did when he was president. So I think that there is a way that sometimes we may need to say something may be a bit urgent, but actually we need to look at how we plan and how we prioritise what happens in the future jointly with our partners. So it's not that anything's horrifically wrong at the moment, but it's I think that incrementally that we can make things better. And I think really the challenge, as will no doubt come out with the COVID inquiries, I mean, a lot of people have already said this, that preparations were largely done for a flu pandemic rather than for something like COVID, and that really skewed some of the preparations probably worldwide, certainly as well as nationally. We don't know what we're going to get. We might get another flu pandemic. We probably will at some stage, but there are other things that come on, and I think a lot of it is having that general degree of overall preparation to face the different challenges that may come along, and not just focus on what we've been on a repeat of something that's happened in the past, because what happens in the future is going to be a little bit different.
Thanks, Tim. I'm going to take one final question from Muriel, and then I'm going to close this item off. Muriel, please.
Tim, thank you for the report. And sometimes it's helpful to have seen a report twice because you miss things the first time, as I've done. So thanks for allowing my question. Jerry was absolutely right in the private water supply. So I wonder if we should consider having that on the list, because it's in the appendix 4.1. And the other thing that came into my mind was you talked about the aircraft potential issue at Inverness Airport. We also have got the cruise ships that come in, and we have had incidents in the past where there's been containment of a cruise ship. So should we consider that as well?
Yes, thanks. I think just to go for the cruise ships, that we deal with that. I think that there are issues that just because something's not in the plan doesn't mean that there aren't plans to deal with that. And we've had a lot of work, particularly with cruise ships. There have been issues a few years ago before my time, but also there's been a lot of work doing on COVID and cruise ships, and also coach tours. I mean, it can be the smaller sort of 50 people rather than several thousand people as well that there are issues with. So those get dealt with. But I think I certainly take the point around including that within planning. I think in terms of the private water supplies, that's mostly going to be an issue for local authorities rather than for ourselves. We tend to deal with the aftermath of things, but there certainly is a role for joint working in that. And I mean, I can reassure you that we are aware and work with our colleagues in local authorities and Scottish Water and SEPA on that. And I mean, and in terms of water quality in general, that's something that is very, very high up on the agenda for what we look at within public health and more broadly in the board. So I think yes, both those areas are things that we do have as significant priorities. Bear in mind that we can't prioritise 27 things to the same extent.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, so just to recap there, we were being asked as a board to approve the Joint Health Protection Plan for 2023 to 2025, and the proposed level of assurance is substantial. Are we happy to do that? Great, okay. We're a little bit behind schedule, but I am going to give everybody a bit of a break. I tell you what, we'll see you back here at 11:45, please, everybody.